Hi everyone, thank you back, welcome back at least, and thank you for coming back to the Nico the Vet Show. Today just a quick one. I thought what we might address is the subject of dogs with itchy bums. So what do I mean by itchy bums? The classic presentation that we would see is what vets call scooting in dogs. So scooting is that rather inelegant thing that you'll see some dogs doing, where they sit right sort of back down on their haunches, they stick their back legs up in the air, put their front legs between the back legs and pull themselves along the ground, so they're sort of scooching along like that on their bums on the ground. So they're literally rubbing their bums on the ground. Again, vets in the veterinary world, we call that scooting. So if you want to make it easier for your vet to understand the symptom you're describing, refer to it as scooting. I had a chap come to me once and I said, right, what can we do for you today? And he said, I brought you in because my dog's doing yoga. And I looked at him and he looked at me and we looked at each other for a while. And after some discussion and questioning, that's what he was trying to describe, was the dog sitting with their bum flat on the ground, tail sticking out backwards, back legs slightly up and outwards, front legs forwards, and dragging himself along. So I suppose quite accurate. It looks like the dog's doing yoga, but they're not doing yoga. That's not the only symptom of an itchy bum. Obviously, also, if it is troubling your bum, you will see them licking the bum area a lot, so lifting the tail and stretching around and squeezing around, trying to have a lick and a chew at the area. So what can cause itchy bums in dogs? It's a short list, fortunately. There's only really, to my mind, one of three things that will do it. One is worms, the second is problems with the anal glands, and the third is that you have allergic skin in the area. So that's a very short list, and we'll go through them one at a time. So worms is a rather delightful concept to consider, but if you have a lot of worms in your bowel, the size of the worms can vary from the hookworms and the roundworms are sort of up to the size of spaghetti strands, so that'll keep you awake at night, or very, very thin threadworms, which are, as they say, really just a few millimeters, several millimeters, and as thin as your hand. You probably wouldn't even see them with the naked eye. But sort of to create an image in your mind, imagine you've got all these sort of wiggly, squirmy worms in your intestines, and as they get to the bum, and the bum's trying to pass them out, the worm doesn't necessarily want to be passed out, and so they squiggle and scratch around. If there's the opening of the bum, you've got the sort of worms trying to be expelled. They're squiggly and wormy around there, and that tickles and irritates your bum. So you'll either drag your bum on the ground trying to scratch the itch, or you will lick at it. So how probable is that? I find really of the three, certainly in first world countries where we're sort of routinely deworming our dogs, I find that's probably the least probable explanation for an itchy bum. So if you have a dog scooting and you are regularly worming them and following a good worming protocol, I think that one's very, very unlikely, which brings us to the second possibility. So the second possibility is you might have problems with the anal glands. So first of all, what are the anal glands? So imagine we're looking at the dog from the rear. So the dog's facing that way, we've got his bum this way, and his tail sticking over the top. So if that's the bum and you imagine it to be a clock, at the 4 o'clock and at the 8 o'clock positions, you have two little glands. One sits there, one sits there. They're under the skin and they open via a very thin tube into the anus. So gland at the 4, gland at the 8. You can actually feel these glands. If you feel the skin are just below at those positions, below the bum, you can feel sort of a marble-sized swelling on either side. So those are normal glands. They should be there. They produce a particularly noxious liquid, very, very, very smelly. To understand the smelliness, those glands are really highly modified in skunks, which gives them the ability to squirt out that very stinky fluid. So dogs and cats, for that matter, will have these glands there. What's the purpose of these glands? To be a little bit pedantic first, we generally call them anal glands, but technically they are not anal glands. Technically they are the anal sacs. But in sort of just popular vernacular, everybody calls them anal glands, so I'll do that for the sake of convenience. So what's the purpose of these little sacs of fluid? And the answer is every time you poo, every time the dog passes a motion, if you imagine again, that's the bum, you've got the gland there and the gland there, and then around the glands you have, so between the bum and the glands are situated between the bum and a big sphincter muscle which goes all the way around. So if the sphincter muscle were to, remember the sacs in that space in between, if the sphincter muscle were to contract, the glands get squashed between the muscle and the anus. But equally, when you poo, as the anus dilates to let the poo out, that gap there gets narrowed, that gap there, and that's where the anal glands live. So basically, passing motions, the anus dilates and it squeezes out the anal gland, and some of that fluid comes out with the poo. And that's how dogs mark their territory. In fact, all animals mark their territory that way. It's not the poo per se necessarily, not the smell of the poo per se. It's the anal gland fluid scent that is a very specific scent to that individual, and that's how they mark their territory. So basically, these glands are designed to be a little bit emptied out every time that you have a poo. And if you're not routinely doing that, if that's not happening for whatever reason, then you find that this fluid just accumulates in the anal sacs. It has nowhere to go, and it starts off pretty liquid, but once it sits there and is not expressed, is not squeezed out of these little sacs, what happens is the same thing pretty much that happens to honey if you leave it on the shelf for a very long time. If you leave sort of liquid honey, leave it there, come back several weeks or months later, it's got that sort of grainy, gritty, granular sort of texture. And that then becomes a problem to pass out of the anal sac, because like I said, the anal sac per se has then a very thin tube leading to the opening of the anus, and that granular crunchy material physically just can't get out. And so that leads to the blockages, which of themselves are uncomfortable, but also the sac doesn't know it's blocked, so it'll just keep making more and more fluid, and often that can lead to a rupture of the sac internally, and that leads to an infection and abscessation, and the first thing you know that it's happened is you've got a nasty sort of smelly hole that's opened up just below the anus at the 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock positions, and you've got this smelly hole discharging. It's very painful, it's pongy, and needs some antibiotics. So it's basically gone from being blocked to infected effectively. Either one of those scenarios will cause some discomfort, and the dog's dragging their bum along because that's their way of trying to sort of squeeze it. It's a bit like if I had a big pimple on my nose and I was just sort of pushing it like this rather than doing a concerted squeeze, because dogs obviously don't have the dexterity in their fingers. So they just sort of drag the bum along the ground. The idea is to sort of push, and again push on my nose, and bang, the pimple or the abscess hopefully or the blocked anal gland will pop and empty its contents. So that's what the dog's trying to do when they're doing that. So if it turns out to be an anal gland problem, then if they are overly full, you just need to, either you or your vet can just express them, just squeeze them out. But if they have become infected, then a different story. Then they obviously need antibiotics and painkillers to a greater or lesser extent. For me, how do you know if they are infected in the absence of them actually having burst as an abscess on the outside, just an infected anal gland? The answer is when you squeeze the contents out of the anal gland, they can have almost any color. Usually it's a brown color. It can be yellow, it can be green. All of those are normal. The only time that I would buy the explanation that there's an infection in the anal gland is if there's blood coming out, whatever it is that you express, whether it be brown, yellow, or green, or whatever color it is. If there's not traces of frank red blood in it, then I would not consider them to be infected. If they are, of course, then they need treatment with antibiotics. And again, in the most extreme case, the anal sac may have burst on the inside, and then you actually get a hole in the skin. So when the anal gland's infected and it hasn't caused an abscess under the skin, then you won't see that, but you will, if you squeeze the contents out, you'll see the blood, but you won't actually see any holes in the skin. And again, the next step along is actually a hole in the skin. Treatment is much the same for all of them. You need some antibiotics to control the infection. So that's the second category, which is anal gland or anal sac problems. And then the third category, the second category is probably also the second least likely, or the second most likely, depending on which way you're counting it down. The most likely is going to be allergies. Now, I have dealt with this in a different recording that I made entitled "Itchy Dogs and Allergies." Please have a look at that for sort of more detail. But in a nutshell, dogs get allergies just like human beings, and we're generally allergic to stuff in the atmosphere, in the air around us. Usually it's pollens and grasses and house dust and storage mites. We manifest as human beings, we manifest as allergies as hay fever, asthma, and eczema. So that's all familiar to us. But dogs, your dog could be allergic to exactly the same things that you're allergic to. So let's say me and my dog are both allergic to oak tree pollens, for example. I would manifest as having hay fever and asthma, and my dog would manifest as having itchy ears, rears, and feet, or any combination of those. So some individuals will just have itchy ears, some just itchy bums, some maybe just one itchy ear, maybe some just itchy feet, a front foot and a back foot, 2 foot, any combination you can imagine. But basically itchy ears, itchy bums, and itchy feet, and sometimes also itching in the armpits and the groins. So why do they manifest as that? I know it sounds illogical, but if you told a dog that if you had an allergy to pollens, you would manifest as a snotty nose, they would say, no, you don't. You'd manifest as an itchy bum or itchy feet or itchy ears. So it's just a species difference. There's no sensible explanation for necessarily why we should manifest differently, but it's important to recognize it. So if you do see your dog itching and scraping their bum along the ground, just lift up the tail and have a little look underneath. You're unlikely to see worms, and again, we said that is really the least probable. It may be an anal gland infection or blockage, and you can generally just feel around there whether you can feel sort of big swollen marble-like structures at the 4 and 8 o'clock positions. And if that's all normal, particularly if you can even see the fluid that they're squeezing out, and a lot of people who deal with the scooting will tell me it's just great, we need to sort this out. It's just great. The dog's leaving these really smelly marks all over my furniture and the carpet at home. Why do we? It's crazy, isn't it? We have these animals in our lives and they destroy our homes. Why do we do it? So particularly if they drag in and you can see the gross sort of brown skid mark on the ground that they're leaving behind, and there's no blood in it, then yes, it's not going to be an anal gland, or very unlikely to be an anal gland problem too. Particularly if you see a lot of redness. So again, there's the dog's bum, there's the tail, and if you see when you lift the tail, sort of under the tail it's red, around the bum it's red, and sometimes even just below the bum it's red. If that whole area seems red and inflamed, then first thing you want to do is check the ears. Do the ears look inflamed and red, and do the feet look inflamed and red? And if you're not sure what color they should be, then have a look at the color at the bum or the ear or between the toes. And then open the coat somewhere else on the dog, on their back, for example. Just split the coat midway over there between their shoulder blades and have a look at the color there. And if you see that they're a bit pinky in one or all of those areas, then yes, you've got a dog with allergies, and the treatment for those would be we need to manage their allergies. Typically, how would we do that? With medications, and again, I'm not going to go into it too much now, but you get with allergy medications, there's a whole bunch that we can choose from, some very much better than the others. I favor Apoquel. I say it every time, but this is not a plug for any one drug company or any one product. It's just what I find works. So I would be a fan of Apoquel for those dogs to help improve it. So to sum up, if your dog has an itchy bum, that's going to manifest as the scooting, which is the very undignified way that they drag their bums along the ground, and they lick and chew at the bum area. It's going to be worms, which is unlikely if you're doing regular worming. It could be an anal gland problem, which could either be that it's blocked, or that it's infected, or that it's actually abscessated and ruptured, and then treat it appropriately. But the vast majority of cases, you're going to just see a little bit of red there, or perhaps not in the red at all. But once you've ruled out the other two, then you're left with allergy as being the most common, and far and away the most common, and that's the one that we need to tackle long term to treat not just the itchy bum, but all the other bits. So by all means, have a look at the other little podcasts I've done to see more detail on them, and I hope you join me next time. Take care. Bye-bye.